Okay, in this video I was just going to do a quick sort of explanation of something that somebody had asked me about the Helios 44-2 lens. So I did a video about using vintage lenses on the Panasonic GH6, and this is the lens that I kind of used. So they'd obviously picked up a copy of the lens and they were just having a few issues with it. So I'll kind of link to the vintage lens video above up in the corner, so if you haven't seen that you can watch it. So effectively it's a M42 lens that we're mounting onto the Micro Four Thirds system. You know, you can use adapters to mount this onto a variety of cameras, but it was just a GH6 tutorial that I'd done. But essentially what someone was saying was they were having the issue where with the lens, they thought the aperture ring had sort of been put on backwards on the lens, and I can kind of understand, you know, where people are coming from with that, because if you can see on here, we've got, you can just about see this red dot here sort of moving around. So if we move it to 2, we'd expect the aperture on the lens to be kind of wide open. But if we look inside there, you can probably just about see the aperture blades are almost fully closed. So on this lens we're at 16 there. So if we bring it over to 16, again just sort of using that, and then we look in there again, you can see probably not so much because the blades are wide open, but it's actually at f.2 now. So we're or f2, we're actually wide open, but it says 16. So I can kind of understand the confusion around that, and the reason for that is because the Helios lens is what you'd call a preset aperture lens, and in this case it has 2 aperture rings. So essentially this one here is correct, you know, obviously this is changing the aperture, so it's doing the job that is required, but the problem is, you know, we can be wandering around in between apertures and we don't really know if we're at the correct aperture, and this also can be really easily knocked, you know, so we could be in one and then switch into the wrong one by accident. So it's not really sort of the way it's supposed to be used. What you'll actually find is different across all these lenses because they're very old, and you know, some of them work better than others. Luckily this copy of it is still in quite good condition. So what you should find, if you just hold this top bit as opposed to the movable ring here, you can actually click this, and then what you'll find now we've clicked it once is the red kind of aperture stop now will actually go 1 less. So I can only go up to 11 now, and you can do this all the way around. So I can stop that all the way around to 2, and then what you'll find now, we're locked in at 2, and then you can see we're wide open at 2, and then when we lock it, oh sorry, just taking the whole lens off my camera. If we lock it again, that takes us to 2.8. So the idea here is that as you're clicking it around, that's the aperture you're selecting. So we've selected 4 there, or we can come back again and we can select 2.8. So it probably makes a bit more sense if we come up to say 4, and then you'll be able to see, actually you can't really see that, if we come up to 8 and then you look in there, you can see we're still wide open at 2. So that doesn't make sense, I guess, to a lot of people. But then when you turn it back to 2 on this one, so the red part is on 2, you can see actually the blades have shut, and well, not shut, but you know, they're down to f8 in there. So the reason for that is kind of when you're at this end, this is f8 on the lens, but it's wide open. So and the reason for that is because on older cameras, you know, when you wanted to use f8, you'd stop to this, it'd be wide open at f2, and then you could do all your focusing and everything at f2, and then once you're done you can then switch into f8 to take your shot. And that doesn't really affect us very much anymore if we're using digital cameras. You know, I'm using a mirrorless camera here, so we can actually do everything on the back of the screen. And the thing probably to say with this is that so this top part is locking in our minimum aperture, we would call it. So it can be a bit confusing if you're just getting into photography, but a minimum aperture is when the blades are, you know, almost shut like that. So on most lenses, your minimum aperture might be maybe 16 or 22, somewhere around that. So when we're talking about minimum aperture, we're talking about those higher numbers, which can be a little bit counterintuitive and confusing, but that's sort of where that is. So yeah, hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. And like I say, some of these, some of the aperture blades on these old lenses can be a little bit jammed up, and they can be a little bit hard to turn sometimes. But as I mentioned, because we're using a mirrorless camera, so when we switch it on, I'm not going to be able to lock focus on anything here, unfortunately. But if you're using a Panasonic camera, it will ask you about this. You won't get this on all cameras. It's to do with the in-body stabilization on the GH6 and also GH5 and older cameras. I'll link to that up in the corner if you do have this camera and you're trying to use it. So it just makes sure the in-body stabilization's working. So that's actually the correct lens. So we'll just press no on that. And then yeah, you'll kind of be able to see if I'm in my movie mode, or any photography mode really. You can as you're moving the aperture, obviously it's going to make a difference because it's letting more light, or cutting down the light coming into the camera. But again, because we're using a mirrorless camera, we just change our shutter speed and our ISO just to compensate all of that. So we haven't got the problem with any of that. So essentially just use the presets on it, and then just put it straight to where you want to be. So the red marker will always be on the 2, but just make sure you're preset to the correct aperture on the lens, if that makes sense. But yeah, if you've got any questions, you can drop them down in the comments. And yeah, if that's helped, please give the video a like. If you want to see more content like this, then please subscribe.